December of 2025. 100 Russian soldiers are trapped in an underground tunnel knowing they will die. 4 days earlier, these same soldiers carried out one of the boldest operations of the war in Ukraine. They infiltrated through an abandoned industrial duct using modified wheelbarrows and electric scooters. That way, they would cross under the Ukrainian lines in Kupiansk. The goal was to emerge behind enemy defenses and capture the city by surprise. At first it worked. Small groups managed to enter the industrial zone, but then the Ukrainians found out. And while Russian reinforcements were still inside the tunnel, they detonated 3 tons of explosives. The tunnel simply collapsed. The supply route was cut off, and now those 100 soldiers were trapped, surrounded with no way out. In the following days, Russian drones began to appear over the industrial zone, but they didn't bring food, they didn't bring ammunition. They brought flags, Russian flags, with a simple order. Wave these flags, film it, show that you control the city. Pure propaganda. While the soldiers were dying, the Kremlin needed the appearance of victory. And this isn't an isolated case. Putin wants the world to see the flags. He wants you to believe that Russia is dominating, that Ukraine is collapsing. But behind the flags, there's a Russian army disintegrating from the inside out. And today I'm going to show you exactly how this is happening. Let's start with the basics, because in the last few months, Putin and his spokespeople have built a very specific narrative. The story is simple. Russia is still holding out, Kupiansk is still standing, Siversk remains under Ukrainian control. And that's not all. Between January and September of 2025, Russia exaggerated its territorial gains by more than 1,200 square kilometers. That's not a miscalculation, that's the size of a large metropolitan city. It's organized lying. Colonel Jan Umerk, Estonia's military commander, saw through the farce in December. He said that Russian propaganda and information warfare aim to influence the West and the United States. The goal is to create a false narrative that the Ukrainian front is on the verge of collapse. Putin's goal is to convince the West, especially the United States, that there is no reason to continue supporting Ukraine, that the West has already tried. Ukraine has failed, and now it's better to accept the losses. If the support continues, according to Putin, the West will only lose more money because Russia is practically winning. But the truth is exactly the opposite of that, because while Putin builds this narrative of total dominance, his army is literally falling apart, and the signs are everywhere. Let me show you 3 examples that make this crystal clear. First, the Russian railways. Now, you need to understand one thing about the Russian army. It doesn't operate like Western armies. While the United States and NATO rely on trucks and road transport, Russia has always depended on railways. That's how ammo, fuel, and troops are moved. If the railway fails, the army fails. And in 2025, the railway is failing. Russian railways. Russia's state-owned railway has a debt of 4 trillion rubles, or $51 billion. Profits have plummeted by 96%. Sanctions have cut off access to critical parts, especially high-quality bearings that used to come from Sweden and the United States. Now, Russia is trying to use inferior Chinese substitutes or is taking parts from other rail cars to fix the result. 300,000 rail cars are sitting idle on the railway network, 20% of the entire fleet. They simply can't move due to mechanical problems, a lack of locomotives, or congestion caused by broken trains blocking the tracks. And this has a direct impact on the front. Fuel trains delay ammunition shipments, they get stuck. In 2022, Russia was firing 60,000 artillery shells per day. Today, that number has dropped drastically. The iron logistics that allowed Russia to dominate with firepower have disappeared. And you can see this in the speed with which Russian troops are able to move between sectors. They're not moving, they're stuck. Now, if you think broken railways are bad, wait until you hear the second sign. Donkeys? Yes, donkeys. At the end of 2025. Images started circulating showing Russian soldiers using donkeys, horses, and even camels for transportation on the front line. We're not talking about remote mountainous terrain where that would make sense. We're talking about the plains of Donetsk and Zaporizhia. Why? Because Ukrainian drones destroy Russian vehicles so quickly that animals have become the only viable option. Light trucks, Ulyanovsky Avtomobilny Zavod vehicles, and Ural trucks are all easy targets. So, the Russians tie signal jammers and ammunition boxes to the backs of donkeys. The Ukrainians called one of these animals Ishak 3000, a donkey carrying a helmet and radio antennas, filmed by a drone as it crawled through the combat zone. A Russian general, Viktor Sobolev, defended this, saying it's normal. But it's not normal, it's the opposite of normal. A modern army that relies on pack animals to supply its artillery is an army that has lost the technological war. And the third sign is the most devastating of all. The Russian soldiers themselves are disappearing. Ukrainian intelligence has reported a massive increase in desertions in the central military district. Alone, more than 25,000 soldiers have abandoned their units. By the end of 2024 and the middle of 2025, in the entire Russian army, desertions are expected to exceed 70,000 in 2025. 70,000. These are not isolated cases. These are mass desertions. Soldiers flee from hospitals, jump off trains, and military personnel simply drop their weapons and disappear. And the reason is clear. The meat assault tactics that Putin orders, human waves sent against fortified Ukrainian positions with no rotation, no rest, just death. To maintain control, Russian commanders have created a system of terror. Intercepted communications show commanders threatening to execute soldiers who retreat. Penal units called Storm Z and Storm V are forced to walk across minefields to find the mines. This kind of army is fragile. It can defend static positions out of sheer fear, but it lacks the confidence or initiative for coordinated operations. That's why Russia continues to rely on simple and brutal frontal assaults. It's not a choice, it's all that's left. Now you might be thinking, okay, the Russian situation is bad, but what if they manage to push just a little further? And what if Pokrovsk finally falls? This is where the story gets really interesting. Because even if Russia manages to take Pokrovsk, and they've been trying for 18 months, what comes next is infinitely worse for them. The Donetsk Fortress Belt, a giant network of military defenses. Pokrovsk is not an isolated city. It is part of a massive system of fortifications that Ukraine has built over the years. These defenses stretch for dozens of kilometers, positioned on high ground. There are multiple layers of trenches, bunkers, minefields, and drone-controlled zones. Besides Pokrovsk, there are two major cities, Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, both as fortified as, if not more than, Pokrovsk. And between them, countless smaller settlements, each one fortified, each one defended. Russia has already lost approximately 100,000 soldiers trying to take Pokrovsk. 100,000. And that was just to reach the first layer of the fortress belt. Military analysts estimate that Russia would need at least 2 more years and hundreds of thousands of additional lives to break through the entire belt. And that's assuming Russia can maintain its current pace of assaults, with broken railways, soldiers deserting, and donkeys replacing vehicles. It can't. The Institute for the Study of War published an assessment in December 2025 that makes this clear. To attack Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, Russia would have to send all its available soldiers from the western, southern, and central regions. It couldn't fight elsewhere simultaneously. In other words, Putin would have to reduce the scale of the war, concentrate everything in one place. But he can't do that. Why? Because that would destroy his narrative. Ukraine can't be collapsing on all fronts if it's Russia that's focusing on fewer places. So Putin is stuck. He can't concentrate forces without admitting weakness. But he also can't keep stretching his troops over 1,250 kilometers of front without completely breaking them. And that brings us to the most important question of all. Why is Putin doing this? Why keep up this farce? Why lie about victories that never happened? The answer is simple. He's desperate. Putin needs victories for the peace negotiations. He needs to force Ukraine to give up Donbass before the internal collapse of the Russian army becomes too obvious to hide. He is in a race against time. His demands, like the annexation of Donbass and forcing Ukraine to destroy its own army, are a bluff. His army can't capture what he's demanding in the negotiations. So he's betting that the West will get tired, that Europeans and Americans will stop sending weapons, that Ukraine, isolated, will be forced to accept bad terms. But the West is not See you in the next one.